So far in speech class, we have discussed reasons we communicate as well as how we communicate. We've also learned that a key concept to understand in speech class is the communication model. This is the basis for all communication, whether that communication is between two individuals or between a public speaker and his or her audience. All communication starts when a sender sends a message through what's known as a channel. The channel could be face-to-face, online, over the phone, via email, by letter, or a myriad of other channels. After the message is sent, hopefully a receiver receives that message. The receiver then often sends back feedback to the sender, and so on, as communication continues in this cyclical fashion. But have you ever thought about the ways in which the ideas, beliefs, and perceptions that we all carry around in our minds every day can affect communication? These things, ideas, beliefs, and perceptions, are the things that create your view of reality. But your view of reality may be very different from others' view of reality, simply because your fields of experience and ways of looking at things are not the same. It's almost like you're viewing the world through one color of glasses, while others may be viewing the world through another shade, thereby affecting the way both of you perceive reality. In this video, I'd like to talk to you about your view of reality and the world, and how it's affected by number 1, the way you process information, 2, your perceptions of others, and 3, your personality, and how these things, in turn, affect communication with others. The first thing I want to look at is a huge one, the way we process information. Did you know that this affects the way you perceive the world? Think about it. Everything you take in during the day, whether it's visual images, words, or actions, are processed through your brain in a specific way in order to make sense of what you're seeing, hearing, or feeling. And not everyone's way of processing information is the same. Try this. Read these words as fast as you can. Now, did your brain focus on the word or on the color? How did your brain take in and process the information? Some people's brains see the color first and say that, or start to say that, even if the word contradicts the color. These people saw reality different than it was simply because their brains process the information differently than others. Oftentimes, these people are the creative types who see colors and images before text and words. Other people see the word first and not the color, and have no problem reading the words correctly. These people are often more literal types, who see words before images. Neither way is right or wrong, it just depends on which way your brain naturally functions, focusing on the colors or focusing on the text. I'm sure you've learned before that there are 2 hemispheres of the brain, left and right. Left brain people are very different than right brain people in that they process information differently. They focus on logic, details, facts, and words. They are more math and science oriented and understand patterns and strategies. They also tend to be practical and safe. In contrast, right brain people focus on something totally different. Their brains focus on feelings, the big picture, imagination, and images. They are more philosophy oriented, and they can dream big, think outside the box, and take risks more naturally than left brain people. Obviously, everybody has some left brain and some right brain in them, but most of us have a dominant side of the brain that we think with. Again, neither of these ways of processing information are right or wrong. They are just different. But as I've said before, they do affect the way a person perceives the world and reality. Now, can you understand how there may be miscommunication or frustration between a strong right-brained individual and a strong left-brained individual based on what their brain focuses on and excels in? This has little to do with people's personalities. It's simply that both individuals process the information that they take in different ways, thereby shading their perceptions about that information. So, how do we take in information? Through our senses, by hearing, tasting, feeling, smelling, or seeing the information. And we all have a dominant sense. Often, it's that dominant sense that takes over when we take in new information. Let me ask you this. If someone were to give you directions to their house, would you want them to simply tell you how to get to your house? Would you instead prefer that they draw a map with streets labeled? Or perhaps you would prefer that they write down the directions with words. Or maybe you're one of those people who needs visual landmarks when getting directions. Lastly, maybe the only way that you would remember it in the future is if you drove it yourself, following your friend in his or her car. No matter what way you prefer to take in this new information, it's neither right nor wrong. It just has to do with how your brain best takes in new information. If you prefer drawn-out maps or landmarks, you may be a visual learner. Wanting to hear the directions may indicate that you're more of an auditory learner. Needing to follow your friend to their house indicates a strong need for kinesthetic learning, learning by doing. How does your dominant learning style affect communication? Well, it impacts how you discuss information with others or how you take in and remember the information that you discuss. Debates, disagreements, and miscommunication can occur when information is not portrayed in a person's best way of receiving it. Knowing your own learning style and being able to pick up on the learning styles of others allows you to better communicate by speaking someone else's language. Learning styles, believe it or not, are a great tool for more effective communication. Communication is not only affected by the way we process information that we take in through our senses, but also by the ways in which we use that information to form our perceptions. It's been said that 95% of the conflict that occurs between people at home, at work, and in families is not due to the issues being discussed, but rather to the different ways people view the issue. So being able to change the way you view or perceive someone or something can prove to be a powerful tool in communication as well. With that in mind, the second area I'd like to look at in this video is perceptions, and I'd like to do it by observing some optical illusions that can teach us some of the principles of human perception. Take a look at this picture. It's a classic, and you've probably already seen it before, but which do you see first, the old lady or the young woman? Believe it or not, whichever you saw first, there's plenty of other people who see the opposite. But here's the deal. Once your brain has seen one woman, it is satisfied in knowing what it's looking at. How often do we do this with people? It's much easier to label someone and move on instead of looking for more that person may be. But looking for more requires that we combat our natural tendency to see things in the simplest possible way. Now, just in case you can't see both at this point, let me help. Here's the old lady's nose, mouth, and eye. Now you can see that she is snuggled into a furry coat with a scarf on her head. Now here's the young woman. See her eyelashes, her jawline, her choker necklace, and her ear. You can see that she's turned away from us and also in a coat and scarf. Let's take a look at another picture. Now, the elephant is definitely a conflict of perception. We're driven to see things in a way that is understandable, and when we can't, we have a mental conflict, and we have difficulty because we know what to be true about elephants having 4 legs doesn't fit what we're actually seeing. The same mental conflict occurs with our perceptions of others when they don't fit our previously held views. We want to see things and people as we know them to be true. Perhaps you believe Obama has a hidden agenda, or Middle Easterners are violent, or Christianity is a myth. If something presented to you in reality conflicts with that previously held perception, you may experience mental conflict and maybe even have a difficult time communicating about that topic because of your previously held perceptions. Here's another. Look at these lines. Are they parallel? Chances are you do not see them as parallel, although they actually are. This suggests that when we are perceiving something, we may not always be perceiving it the way it is. In reality, perception is a very fluid process. It's not concrete. Perception isn't always reality. That's why 5 different witnesses of the same accident can all give different testimonies. It doesn't necessarily mean that one of them is lying. They may simply have perceived things differently than someone else. The truth is, it is our perceptions rather than reality on which we often act. What we perceive to be true in our minds is what we react to, even if it's not always the case. For example, if you believe that your teacher is a jerk, whether it's true or not, your brain will try to align all of your experiences with that belief. If your teacher does one thing that upsets you, you'll just chalk it up as him or her being a jerk again. But if your perception is that your teacher is cool and he or she does one thing to upset you, you may instead chalk it up as that teacher being under too much stress or maybe having a bad day. Your actions align with your perceptions. Now, how about being on the receiving end of perception? Consider your parents. If they perceive that you are irresponsible, it may seem like they're trying to align everything with that belief, and you just can't win no matter what you do to prove otherwise. But if they believe that you are responsible, their actions will follow that perception, even if it's wrong. See how powerful perceptions can be, and how sometimes they can be different than reality? Now let's try another. In this picture, do you see rows or columns? What about if I rotate this image? Now what do you see? You see, when we look at things from a different angle, sometimes we see things differently. In communication, sometimes that's essential to understanding others. Our going out of our way to view things differently. Don't always expect the other person to do it. Sometimes you need to alter your view if you're going to get anywhere in a relationship or communication. Don't you wish everyone did the same for you? Now with this image, which triangle is more defined? Depending on what's around something, particularly contrast surrounding something, we may see it differently. With this in mind, think about the diversity in your neighborhood. Depending on the surroundings and what is the norm in your neighborhood, perhaps someone of a different ethnicity is perceived incorrectly simply because they're in contrast to the majority. On this slide, which circle is larger? Again, one is perceived to be larger because of what's around it. Look at these lines. Which is longer? Again, what's around the line changes the way you perceive it, even though they are the same. I'm certain there's an interesting life lesson there. Can you see it? In this image, do you see any gray dots? Well, we may not always perceive things correctly, as we've learned from previous visual examples. This example shows us that sometimes we see things that aren't even there. Think about this. Sometimes we look at someone and we draw all sorts of conclusions based on the way that they're dressed and the way they carry themselves, things that may not even be true. We're the ones adding the information, just like our brains have added the dots in this image. They're not really there, but we see them, right? Obviously, it's an optical illusion, but consider how many illusions we create daily in our own minds, too, by adding information. Just because we're looking at something doesn't mean we're always really seeing it the way it is. Now here's some word puzzles. In this one, focus on the figures or focus on the background, which allows you to see some words. Your focus drives your perception. It's our job to alter our focus, which sometimes alters our perception or what we see in others. In this one, can you read the word? Focus on the black objects first. Now focus on the white. See how your focus affects what you really see? Be sure you're focusing on the right things when you're communicating with others. Now here's a fun and surprising one. Read this paragraph out loud. I'll give you a moment to do so. Did you notice how your brain substitutes the needed information so that it's not so frustrating? Just as in other examples, your mind has altered the X's to something that makes sense for you already. Were you surprised at how easy this was to do? It's not surprising that we find it so easy to substitute information in others as well so that they make more sense to us. This can be a good or a bad thing depending on the communication situation. Now, while these optical illusions can be fun to look at and analyze, here's the bottom line or big idea of all of this. First, our brains want to organize, categorize, and define and make sense of the information in the simplest way possible. Secondly, people aren't as easy to organize and define as information. There's a lot more that makes up a person than what's on the surface, so don't make assumptions just because it's easier on your brain or your opinions. Thirdly, we must be careful with our perceptions and how we categorize and communicate with others based on our perceptions. Remember, learning about fields of experience in the communication model, well, it's a person's field of experience that makes up who they are. Be sure you think about what, from a person's perspective, may be making them do or say the things they do. Sometimes it's not so black and white. And try to remember that your field of experience may cloud your own judgment of others sometimes too. In my opinion, a little grace and a lot of communication can always go a long way in understanding others. The final factor that greatly affects communication is personality styles. Why are personality styles important in communication? Because our personality styles are based on a combination of two things: our assertiveness, or how likely we are to be outgoing in a situation, and secondly, our responsiveness, how likely we are to voice our thoughts in a situation. Two huge factors in communication. In most views on personality style theory, all personality styles can be boiled down to 4 types, which you will learn about in this class. Each of these 4 types has a very distinct and, believe it or not, predictable pattern of behavior. Once you understand these patterns in other people based on their personality styles, you have the key to unlock your ability to get along with and communicate with nearly anyone. In order to learn about which personality style you might be, get a survey from Miss Price. Then after completing it, watch the video on YouTube entitled KP Speech Class Personality Styles to score your results. Be sure that you get the scoring sheet and notes handout from Miss Price first. Again, you will need these handouts before you watch the video. The first one is the personality style survey, the second one is a scoring handout, and the third one is a notes handout. Today, we have looked at 3 areas that powerfully impact the way we all communicate with others. Whether that communication is intrapersonal, interpersonal, in groups, or public, these 3 areas, the way we process information, our perceptions, and our personality styles, all work together to create our view of reality and are also impacted by our fields of experience. But none of these things are set in stone. You can't say, well, it's too bad we can't communicate because I'm different than you. The beauty of human communication is that by altering some of your own tendencies, you can create more understanding with others. Knowing your own tendencies when it comes to the way you process information, the way you perceive things, or the way your personality plays out in communication is the first tool in creating this understanding. The great philosopher Socrates argued to know thyself in order to understand your world. Hopefully, after watching this video, you now understand how powerful knowing yourself can be when communicating with and dealing with others.